The roast chicken sat between us, steaming, a prop in a play I hadn't realized we were performing. I'd spent the afternoon preparing it the way Irina had taught me, with lemon and thyme from the garden. It was supposed to be a quiet Sunday dinner. My son, Alexei, and his wife, Anya, my family. The table was set with our good china, the silver catching the warm, low light of the chandelier. For a moment everything felt normal, fragile, but normal. Alexei was talking about his latest deal, something about commercial real estate. His voice smooth and confident. He was always so sharp in his suits, even on a Sunday. Anya sat beside him, a silent, polished statue, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. I should have sensed the chill in the air, the calculation behind their pleasantries, but a father wants to believe in the warmth of his own table. Then the conversation died. Alexei placed his fork down with a precise, final click. The sound echoed in the sudden silence. He leaned forward, his elbows on the table, and the mask of the dutiful son fell away completely. "Papa," he began, his voice losing all its previous warmth, becoming flat and hard. "This charade has gone on long enough." I felt my brow furrow, a genuine confusion. "Charade, Alexei? What are you talking about?" He didn't smile. His eyes, my own eyes reflected back at me, held no affection. "You're 78, he stated, as if reading a verdict. "It's time to stop pretending you're immortal." A cold knot began to form in my stomach. This wasn't a conversation. This was an opening statement. "It is time," he continued, his voice rising slightly, gaining a cutting edge, "to transfer the family assets, the company, the properties, the trusts, to me now." He let the word hang in the air. Now. It was a demand, not a request. Then he delivered the blow, the one that felt like a physical impact, driving the air from my lungs. "I can't wait for you to die." The words landed in the center of the table, ugly and brutal, staining the linen, poisoning the food. I could only stare at him. My son, the boy I taught to ride a bike, the young man I guided through his first business failure, the man standing as the best man at his wedding. He had just told me to my face that my continued existence was an inconvenience to his ambitions. Before I could form a word, a protest, a cry of pain, he moved. From a leather portfolio beside his chair, he produced a thick sheaf of papers. He didn't hand it to me. He slammed his palm down on the table, making the plates jump, and slid the document across the polished wood. It skidded to a stop right in front of my dinner plate. I looked down. The top page was dense with legalese. Transfer of assets and power of attorney. It was all there. Everything Irina and I had spent a lifetime building. It was pre-drafted, premeditated. This wasn't a spontaneous outburst. This was a planned assault. My eyes lifted from the damning paper and found Anya. She was watching me, her expression utterly serene. And then slowly, deliberately, she gave a single firm nod. It wasn't a nod of encouragement for her husband. It was a nod of cold agreement, a confirmation. She was a co-conspirator in this coup. In that moment, the room didn't just feel silent. It felt vacuum-sealed. The familiar sights of my home, Irina's favorite vase on the sideboard, the books lining the walls, the view of the garden through the window, all of it receded, becoming a blurred backdrop to this stark personal betrayal. The ultimate betrayal. It wasn't from a business rival or a jealous colleague. It was from my flesh and blood, my only child. He hadn't just asked for my money, he had declared my life to be an obstacle, and he had done it in the one place I had always felt safe, surrounded by the ghosts of a happier past. The gut punch was visible, I'm sure. I felt the color drain from my face, felt a tremor start deep inside me. This was more than an insult. It was an eviction notice from my own life, served by the person I was supposed to pass it on to. The world knows me as Nikolai, just Nikolai. A quiet man of 78 years, whose days are measured not in deals closed or empires built, but in the slow, patient turning of seasons in my garden. My life is a small, contained thing. It is the rich, dark scent of damp earth under my fingers, the weight of a well-bound book in my lap, and the silent, constant presence of my late wife, Irina. She is everywhere and nowhere. Her memory is the ghost in the sunlight that streams through the kitchen window, the whisper in the rustle of the birch leaves she loved so much. I tend to her roses with a devotion that borders on ritual, pruning each branch with a precision she would have appreciated. This is my world now, a world of quiet routines and gentle solitude. To anyone watching, to my son, Alexei, I am exactly what I appear to be. An old man softened by time and loss, living out his final years in harmless, placid retirement. A book on the shelf, a man in a chair. That is the portrait I have carefully painted, and it is one he has accepted without question. But I was not always this man. Decades ago, they called me the architect. It was not a title given lightly. It was earned in the bloodless trenches of corporate warfare, a name spoken with a mixture of awe and fear by those who understood what it truly meant. I did not build my empire with the brute force of capital alone. I built it from the rubble of other men's ambitions, using blueprints I drew in my mind long before the first foundation was ever laid. My tools were not just money and leverage, but an intimate, almost surgical understanding of human weakness. I knew which rival was driven by vanity, which by greed, which by a desperate need for validation. I knew their pressure points, their secret shames, the fragile pillars upon which their confidence was built. My strategy was never about the immediate explosive victory. It was about patience. It was about foresight. While others were playing checkers, frantically jumping pieces, I was playing a game of chess on a board only I could see, thinking 10, 15, 20 moves into a future they were too short-sighted to envision. I would plant a seed of doubt in a boardroom, a seemingly insignificant comment, and watch it grow over months into a forest of paranoia that would tear a company apart from the inside. I would extend a line of credit to a competitor, knowing full well the terms would force them into an expansion they couldn't sustain, and I would be waiting patiently to acquire their carcass for pennies on the dollar when they inevitably collapsed under the weight of their own greed. It was psychological warfare, disguised as business. I broke men not by destroying what they had, but by leading them to destroy it themselves. I was a master of the long game, a connoisseur of delayed gratification. My empire wasn't forged in the fire of passion. Passion is messy, unpredictable, and ultimately a weakness. It was constructed with the cold, unyielding logic of a mathematical proof, every variable accounted for, every outcome calculated. Emotion was a variable to be manipulated in others and ruthlessly suppressed in myself. That man, the architect, he has been dormant for a long time. I put him away deliberately. I folded him up like a cherished but dangerous suit of clothes and placed him in a trunk in the attic of my soul when Irina grew ill. The world of cutthroat strategy had no place beside her hospital bed. The man who could foresee market crashes and corporate coups could not foresee a world without her, and when she left, that part of me seemed to leave with her. I chose this quiet life, this unassuming identity of Nikolai the gardener, Nikolai the widower. I thought he was gone for good, that the relentless engine of my mind had finally been stilled, its formidable power fading into the gentle hum of memory. But the mind is a curious thing. It does not forget its own nature. The skills remain, like a language learned in childhood, the ability to see patterns where others see chaos, to calculate trajectories of human behavior, to wait with infinite patience. These are not things one unlearns. They simply go quiet. They settle into the background, like the deep, slow pulse of the earth beneath my roses. The mind is a weapon, and though I had placed mine in its velvet case, I never threw away the key. I am still here, the quiet man in the garden, and the architect is still here, sleeping, waiting in the deep, quiet soil of my memory. The silence after that dinner was heavier than any I had ever known. It wasn't the quiet of peace, but the stillness of a battlefield after the first shocking volley. I had hoped, foolishly, that Alexei's outburst was a moment of feverish greed, a poison that would work its way out of his system with a little time and distance. I was wrong. The dinner wasn't the end of it, it was merely the opening move. The first sign came from my cousin, Yuri, who lives in Helsinki. Our calls are usually brief, filled with pleasantries about the weather and his grandchildren, but this time his voice was laced with a clumsy, awkward concern. "Nikolai," he'd said after a long pause, "we all get older. It is the way of things. There is no shame in stepping back, letting the younger generation take the reins." When I asked him what he meant, he became flustered, muttering something about hearing things and just wanting what's best. That was the first whisper. I heard it clearly, even from 500 miles away. Then the whispers became a chorus. An aunt in Moscow, a second cousin in London, calls and emails that all carry the same strange, concerned tone. They spoke of my stubbornness, my advanced age, my apparent inability to understand modern financial complexities. They were being prepped. Alexei was methodically isolating me, turning my own blood into a jury he was handpicking, painting a portrait of a doddering old fool clinging to his treasure chest with frail, desperate hands. He wasn't just asking for my money, he was trying to rewrite my very identity, erasing the man I was and replacing me with a feeble caricature in the minds of everyone who knew me. Each call was a small, precise cut, and I felt myself bleeding, credibility, drop by drop. The siege then moved to my home, my sanctuary. He arrived one Tuesday with a man named Mr. Davos, a sleek individual in an expensive suit that tried too hard to look casual. "Papa, this is a friend," Alexei said, his smile a perfect plastic replica of warmth. "A family consultant. He just wants to ask a few questions, get a sense of your daily routine." For the family's peace of mind, Mr. Davos was a lawyer. I knew it the moment he shook my hand, his grip calculated to be both firm and unthreatening. His eyes were scanners, taking inventory of my books, the neatness of my desk, the slight tremor in my hand as I poured the tea, a tremor I've had since I was 40, born of too much coffee and intense concentration, not of age. The informal capacity assessment was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. He didn't ask about my assets, he asked if I knew what day it was, if I could remember Irina's birthday, if I felt confident managing my own medication. He spoke to me with the slow, deliberate patience one uses on a child. And Alexei just sat there, watching, his expression a mask of filial concern. I played my part. I was the gentle, slightly confused Nikolai. I answered slowly, sometimes pausing as if searching for a word. I let them believe their own narrative. Inside, however, the cold fury was beginning to burn. This was no longer an insult. It was a violation. He had brought a stranger into the home I built with Irina to clinically evaluate my worth, my competence, my very right to my own mind. But the most audacious move was yet to come. I still have friends on the board of the company I founded, men and women who remember the architect. They began to call me, their voices tight with unease. "Nikolai," one said, "your son has been in contact. He's expressed concerns about the stability of the company's leadership, given your situation. He's been making suggestions, very subtle ones, about forming an advisory committee to assist with long-term strategy." That was the checkmate move in his mind, I suppose. Undermine me at home, then move to dismantle my legacy in the one place it still had a tangible form. He was creating a feedback loop of doubt. The family hears I'm unstable. The board hears the family is concerned. And soon, the pressure from both sides would become an unbearable weight, crushing me into submission. The pressure was immense, a constant humming tension that filled the quiet spaces of my house. It was a deliberate, calculated siege. He wasn't just pushing. He was surrounding me, cutting off my avenues of support, methodically dismantling my defenses. He wanted to wear me down, to exhaust me, to force the old man to make a rash, emotional mistake. He was treating me like a cornered animal. What he failed to understand was that a cornered animal is one thing, but a strategist who has been backed into a corner is the most dangerous creature of all. He was so busy building his prison around me, he never stopped to consider that I had been the one who designed the locks. The scent of damp earth and blooming jasmine usually calmed me. It was Irina's favorite. This little corner of the garden she'd designed herself. I was there that afternoon, not for peace, but to escape the sterile, oppressive air my son had brought into the house. He was inside pacing, his voice a low, incessant murmur that had been grating on me for days. I was on my knees, my hands buried in the soft soil, tending to her roses. It was a futile attempt to find a fragment of the woman I'd lost, a sliver of the life we'd built together before the silence and the empty chairs. His voice cut through the quiet, sharper and clearer than before. He must have stepped out onto the stone patio just beyond the trellis, thinking himself alone. The words weren't meant for my ears. They were a secret, and secrets in my experience were the most dangerous things in the world. "Don't worry, Viktor," he said, his tone chillingly casual, conspiratorial. "The old man is soft now. He puts in his garden and reads his books. The fight's gone out of him." I froze. My fingers, caked with black soil, went still around the stem of a rose. Viktor. The name was a ghost, a spectre from a past I had deliberately buried under decades of quiet retirement. Viktor Morozov. I hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in 25 years. He was a man of voracious appetite and brittle pride, a competitor I hadn't just beaten, but systematically dismantled. I hadn't used a hammer, I'd used a scalpel, severing his supply lines, turning his allies, exposing his financial chicanery until his empire crumbled into dust and bankruptcy. He had sworn revenge, of course, they always did, but I had moved on, built a different life with Irina. I'd assumed he had faded into obscurity, or perhaps an early grave fueled by his own bitterness, and now his name was on my son's lips. Alexei continued, his voice dripping with a smug confidence that made my stomach clench. "Once I control the shares, our merger will go through. We'll dismantle his legacy and sell it for parts. It's just business." The world seemed to tilt on its axis, the gentle hum of bees, the warmth of the sun on my neck. It all receded, replaced by a roaring silence in my head. Dismantle his legacy, sell it for parts. This wasn't about impatience anymore. It wasn't even about greed, not in its purest form. The insult at the dinner table, the whisper campaign, the lawyer, that had been a personal, familial betrayal. A wound deep and painful from my own flesh and blood. But this was something else entirely. This was a conspiracy. My son wasn't just an impatient heir. He had become a willing pawn for the one man who had ever truly wanted to see me erased. He wasn't just trying to inherit my fortune. He was planning to hand the keys to my life's work over to the man who wanted to turn it into scrap. A coldness seeped into my bones, a familiar chill I hadn't felt in a long, long time. It was the cold of a winter in Moscow, the cold of a boardroom at 3 in the morning, the cold of absolute unemotional calculation. The part of me I'd locked away, the part Irina had gently coaxed into retirement, the part known in certain hushed circles as the architect, stirred from its long slumber. The pieces, once a confusing, emotional jumble, snapped into a horrifying, perfect clarity. Alexei's aggression wasn't a tantrum, it was the opening move in a hostile takeover, and I was the target. He saw a senile old man, a hollowed-out shell. He saw weakness where there was patience. He saw a fortune to be plundered, not a legacy to be honored. He had looked at the empire his mother and I had built with our blood, our sweat, and our love, and he had seen a collection of assets to be liquidated. He had brought my greatest enemy into my own home, into my garden, and plotted the funeral of my life's work over the very soil where my wife's memory lived. The click was deafening. It was the sound of a lock turning, of a door slamming shut, of a final irrevocable line being drawn. The father in me, the man who had held him as a baby, who had taught him to ride a bicycle, who had mourned with him at his mother's funeral. That man receded, pushed aside by a far older, more formidable presence. The personal insult was now a professional declaration of war. The battle was no longer for my money. It was for my history. It was for Irina's memory. It was for the very meaning of my existence. I looked down at my hands, at the rich, dark earth clinging to my skin. For years, I had cultivated life here. I had nurtured beauty and peace. But the man I used to be knew that the same soil that gives life can also conceal traps and foundations for fortresses. Alexei had just made a catastrophic miscalculation. He thought he was dealing with a gardener. He was about to learn he was facing the architect of his own ruin. The game had changed, and he didn't even know he was already playing on my board. The silence in my study was a physical presence, thick and heavy. It was the kind of quiet that came after a storm, but this wasn't the calm of peace. It was the eerie stillness of a battlefield after the first shocking volley. My fingers traced the smooth, cool silver of the frame, the one that held the only thing in this room that was truly irreplaceable. Irina. Her smile, captured forever in black and white, seemed to hold a secret, a knowing look that had always seen straight through me. For years I had looked at this photo and felt the ache of loss, the soft, grieving warmth of a man who had lost his other half. But tonight something different stirred. I had just come in from the garden, the scent of night-blooming jasmine still clinging to my clothes, a fragrant lie masking the poison of what I had overheard. Alexei's voice, so confident, so conspiratorial, talking to Viktor. Viktor. A name I hadn't uttered in decades, a ghost I had buried under a mountain of success and a life well lived. Hearing it from my own son's lips was more than a betrayal. It was a desecration. For a long time I just sat there, letting the initial wave of white-hot emotion, the hurt, the fury, the sheer, staggering disbelief wash over me. It crashed against the shores of my mind, threatening to pull me under. A part of me, the part that was just Nikolai, the quiet gardener, the lonely widower, wanted to break, to scream, to weep for the boy I'd raised, for the man he had become. But then something shifted. It was a subtle click, like the final, decisive turn of a lock in a vault. The emotional storm didn't recede so much as it was simply switched off. A circuit breaker in my soul, tripped after 78 years, finally reset itself to its original factory setting. The heat in my veins cooled, replaced by a glacial clarity, the trembling in my hands stilled, not from forced control, but from a complete absence of the need for it. I was no longer just Nikolai. The architect was awake. It was a persona I had retired, a suit of armor I'd hung up in a closet of my mind, believing I would never need it again. I had built a life of softness and simplicity around the memory of Irina, a life she would have loved. But she would have understood this. She was the only one who ever truly knew the man behind the legend, the cold engine that powered the empire. She knew that my kindness was a choice, not a nature. My gaze drifted from her photo to the window to the dark silhouette of the garden. Alexei was out there somewhere, plotting with the man I had broken, and he had made the most fundamental of errors. He thinks this is about money. The thought was so clear, so precise, it was as if it had been etched onto the inside of my skull. He sees the company, the properties, the numbers in the bank ledgers. He sees the spoils. He is a child staring at the glittering crown, believing that possessing it makes him king. He does not see the foundation upon which it was built, the intricate architecture of influence, strategy, and foresight. It was never about the fortune. It was about the system I designed to create and protect it. A system is a territory with borders and rules and vulnerabilities. He hasn't just trespassed. He has declared war on the territory itself, believing the old warden has forgotten how to defend it. He has brought a knife to a chess match. His weapons are blunt instruments, social pressure, legal threats, a corporate alliance. They are the desperate, flailing attacks of a man who believes power is about force and immediacy. He believes my only power is my wealth, the tangible assets he can seize. He has forgotten, or perhaps he never knew, that my true power was always my mind. The wealth was merely the byproduct, the proof of concept. I didn't build a fortune, I built a system, a self-perpetuating, resilient, deeply complex system. And every system, no matter how perfect, has a kill switch. A failsafe designed not for easy use, but for absolute final defense. And I designed this one. A plan began to form, not in a frantic rush, but like a crystal growing in a supersaturated solution, inevitable, structured, and coldly beautiful. I would not fight him head-on, to engage in his petty skirmishes, to rebut his whispers, to wrestle with him over documents. That would be to play his game on his terms. It would be a battle of attrition, and while I had the resources, he had the one thing I did not, time. Or so he thought. I would demonstrate the ultimate power, the power of time itself, his greatest asset, his youth, his impatience, his 35-year-old belief that the world moves quickly would become his greatest liability. My experience has taught me that the world's most profound shifts happen not in the frantic rush of quarters and fiscal years, but in the slow, grinding turn of decades. I operate on the timescale of mountains. He is frantic over the shifting of sand. The plan then was not to defeat him. Defeat implies a contest, a winner and a loser. That would still grant his ambition a certain legitimacy. Number. The goal was to make his victory impossible, to render his every move, his every scheme, his entire conspiracy with Viktor utterly and completely meaningless. I would not block his path to the throne. I would prove to him, in the most concrete, unassailable terms, that the throne he so desperately craves simply does not exist in the form he imagines. I would lock the kingdom away in a vault of time and hand him a calendar. I looked once more at Irina's photograph. The knowing look in her eyes seemed to sharpen. She understood. This wasn't about revenge, it was about restoration, the restoration of order, the defense of a legacy that was as much hers as it was mine. The quiet, grieving man was stepping aside. The architect was taking the board, and the game, at long last, was about to begin. The silence in my study was no longer a comfort. It was a workshop. The anger, the hurt, the raw sense of betrayal I'd felt at that dinner table. It had all been fuel, necessary fuel to be sure, to get the engine started. But now the emotion was gone, burned away in a clean, hot flame, leaving behind only a core of polished, cold-forged steel. The architect was awake, and he had work to do. The first move was the most personal, the most invasive. It was a gambit that required absolute secrecy. I told Alexei I was visiting an old friend for a week, a harmless fiction. Instead, I checked into a private clinic in Zurich. A place that doesn't advertise in magazines, but is whispered about in circles where wealth meets a desperate desire for more time. For 3 days I was not Nikolai, the grieving father. I was Subject 78 Delta. They took everything, liters of blood, mapped every electrical pathway of my heart, scanned my brain in such detail they could likely see the memory of Irina's smile. They sequenced my genome, probing for the tiny, ticking time bombs of heredity. They tested my strength, my flexibility, my lung capacity. They put me through cognitive drills that would have exhausted a man half my age. It was exhausting, humbling, and yet profoundly empowering. This was not the checkup of a man waiting to die. This was the audit of a system being stress-tested for decades more of operation. When the lead physician, a man with the calm, unblinking eyes of a falcon, sat me down, he didn't give me a prognosis. He gave me a report card. "Your telomere length is exceptional," he said, pointing to a graph that looked more like a man in his 40s. "Your cardiovascular system shows the plaque buildup of a man perhaps 55. Your cognitive scores are not just holding steady. In strategic reasoning and long-term memory, they are in the 99th percentile for any age." He looked at me, not with pity for an old man, but with the respect one gives a finely tuned machine. "Biologically speaking, Mr. Volkov, you are an outlier. With current advancements, a life expectancy of 110 is not an optimistic fantasy. It is a statistically plausible projection. The paper he handed me was not a medical file. It was a weapon, a legally admissible, scientifically irrefutable declaration that my son's entire premise, that I was a relic nearing his expiration date, was a catastrophic miscalculation. Armed with that certainty, the second move fell into place with the satisfying click of a well-oiled lock. I reached out to 2 people. One was an attorney, a man named Gregor, whom I had saved from professional ruin 40 years ago. His loyalty was not to my money, but to his debt, which is the strongest currency of all. The other was a financial engineer, a reclusive genius in Monaco who understood systems the way a composer understands symphonies. We met in secure, soundproofed rooms. There were no emails, no paper trails that led back to my home. The plan was diabolical in its elegance. We dismantled my entire fortune, the company shares, the real estate holdings, the liquid assets, the art collection. Piece by piece, we fed them into a new, bespoke financial engine of our own design. A series of interlocking trusts and annuities, a labyrinth with no center, no minotaur, and only one exit. The principal, the massive core of the capital, was placed into a deep freeze. The terms were absolute and irrevocable. No one, not me, not Alexei, not a court order, could access that principle for 30 years. It was gone, locked away in a vault of time itself. The engine, however, produced a single, predictable and generous output, a monthly disbursement, an annuity that would flow to one person and one person only for the rest of their natural life. Me. It was enough to live in absolute luxury, to fund a dozen more of these medical checkups, to ensure my comfort was never in question, but it was a stream, not an ocean. Alexei could not dam it, could not redirect it, could not sell his future rights to it. He could only watch it flow to me, month after month, year after year, a constant quiet reminder of his failure. We built a fortress not of stone, but of seconds, minutes and hours. A fortress that could only be taken by outliving me, a task which now seemed, according to the cold, hard data from Zurich, nearly impossible for him. The final piece was the bait. I waited a week, letting the new structures settle, the legal concrete dry into an unbreakable foundation. Then I picked up the phone. My voice was perfectly calibrated, a mixture of weary resignation and a father's lingering hope. "Alexei," I said, the name feeling like a foreign object in my mouth. "It's your father." "Your mother. She would have wanted peace. Come to the house tomorrow. Bring Anya. Let's discuss the transfer." I could hear the barely contained triumph in his silence, the sharp intake of breath. He thought the siege had worked. He thought the pressure had cracked me. He agreed immediately, his voice slick with premature victory. As I hung up, I looked out at my garden. The roses were beginning to bloom. I allowed myself a small, cold smile. The stage was set. The players were taking their positions, and they had no idea that the script had already been written, not for their victory, but for their profound and lasting defeat. The silence in the dining room was a physical thing, thick and heavy as lead. It was the same room, the same polished mahogany table where, not so long ago, my son had declared his war. Now he sat across from me, his posture radiating a smug, impatient victory. Anya was a statue beside him, her lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line of anticipation. They had come for their prize. They expected a signature, a transfer of power, the final whimpering surrender of the old lion. Alexei's eyes were fixed on my hands, waiting for me to produce the stack of documents he had so arrogantly slid toward me that first night. I saw the ghost of a smile playing on his lips. He thought he had won. He thought the pressure, the whispers, the humiliation had worked. He believed he had successfully besieged the castle, and the old king was finally opening the gates. My hand moved, but it didn't go toward a briefcase or a folder thick with legal papers. Instead, my fingers found a single crisp sheet of paper that had been lying face down beside my plate. I picked it up. The sound of the paper sliding across the smooth wood was like a razor cut in the quiet. I pushed it toward him, stopping it just before it reached his place setting. His eyes flickered down, the smugness faltering for a fraction of a second, replaced by confusion. This was not what he was expecting. This was not a contract. It was a summary report, its header bearing the name of a clinic in Switzerland, so exclusive and discreet that its very name was a password among a certain echelon of the global elite, the Longevity Institute. "You were right to be concerned about my health, Alexei," I said, my voice calm, devoid of the tremor he undoubtedly hoped to hear. It was the flat analytical tone of the architect, stating a simple, irrefutable fact. "So, I had it checked." Thoroughly he picked up the paper, his brow furrowed. I watched his eyes scan the lines of text, the columns of data. I saw the moment he comprehended the first line of the executive summary, a tiny, almost imperceptible twitch at the corner of his eye. "It seems," I continued, as if discussing the weather, "I have the biological age of a man of 55. My telomeres are exceptionally long. My cardiac and cognitive functions are in the 99th percentile for men of my chronological age. The doctor's official, legally admissible opinion, signed by 3 of the world's leading experts in gerontology, you'll note their names at the bottom, is that with current and foreseeable medical science, my life expectancy is robust." I let the word hang in the air for a moment, letting its full, terrifying implication sink in. "I will, in all likelihood, outlive you." The color began to drain from his face, starting at his hairline and receding like a tide, leaving behind a pale, waxy mask. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. The paper in his hand developed a faint tremor. "But of course," I went on, my tone still conversational, "a long life requires financial stability. Your insistence on the matter of the assets made me realize I needed to take drastic steps to secure my future. My very, very long future." I leaned back in my chair, steepling my fingers. "So, last week, I undertook a comprehensive legal restructuring. All of it. The company shares, the real estate portfolios, the trusts, the offshore holdings. Everything you so desperately crave is now locked inside a series of irrevocable annuities and long-term protective trusts. The principal is completely inaccessible to anyone, including me. It cannot be sold, leveraged, or transferred. The key clause is quite simple. The capital becomes frozen for 30 years. I saw Anya's hand clench on the tablecloth, her knuckles turning white. It provides a generous, unchangeable monthly income, I explained, solely to me for the duration of my life. You will receive nothing, not a single dollar of the principal. You cannot touch it until you are nearly 70 years old. And by that time, Alexei, according to this very thorough and very expensive report, I will likely still be here, enjoying the fruits of my labor and the income from my locked-away fortune. I tilted my head, looking at him not as a father, but as a strategist assessing a defeated opponent. Your partner, Viktor, he will be so disappointed. He bet on a horse that cannot run the race. In fact, the horse he bet on has been retired to a very comfortable, very permanent pasture. Your entire plan, the pressure campaign, the alliance with my oldest enemy, it's not just defeated, it's been rendered absurd. You are, for all intents and purposes, financially neutered for the next 3 decades. The collapse was total. The smugness was gone, replaced by a raw, gutted horror. His shoulders slumped, the fine fabric of his expensive suit suddenly looking like a shroud. He stammered, a wet, incoherent sound. But, Papa, you can't. The company, Viktor. He was no longer looking at a frail old man he could push into a corner. He was looking at the immutable force of time itself, weaponized and aimed directly at the heart of his ambition. He had wanted my empire, but I had just shown him that the empire now had a lifespan that stretched far beyond his own. He had not just lost the battle, he had lost the war before he even understood he was fighting on the wrong battlefield. The victory he thought was in his grasp had just turned to dust, and the taste of it was choking him right in front of me. The silence they left behind was heavier than any slammed door. It was a dense, suffocating quiet, thick with the ghosts of their ambition and the chill of their failure. Anya couldn't even look at me. She just stared at the floor, her face a pale, rigid mask, as she followed my son out of the house. Alexei's shoulders were hunched, not in defeat, but in a kind of furious, impotent shock. He had come for a coronation and had been handed a life sentence of waiting. I watched from the window as their car pulled away, its tires crunching on the gravel with a finality that echoed through the entire property. I did not feel triumph. I did not feel joy. What settled over me was something far more profound, and in its own way, more terrifying. A cold, absolute peace. The frantic, desperate energy of the siege was gone. The constant, low-grade hum of anxiety that had been my companion for months had simply switched off. The house, my sanctuary that had felt so violated, was just a house again. It was quiet. It was mine. The war was over, and I was the only one left standing on the battlefield. But a war is not truly over until you have secured the territory. The next morning, I woke at my usual time. The sun was just beginning to paint the sky in shades of rose and gold over my garden. I performed my rituals with a new, sharpened focus. The tea tasted clearer, the air felt cleaner. Every movement was deliberate, a preparation. I did not choose one of my soft, worn cardigans. I went to the very back of my closet and selected a suit I had not worn in over a decade. The fine, dark wool felt like a second skin, a uniform from a past life. As I knotted the tie, I wasn't looking at an old man in the mirror. I was looking at the ghost of the architect, and today I was inviting him back for a guest appearance. The drive to the corporate headquarters was a meditation. I did not rehearse what I would say. The plan was not in notes or on slides. It was etched into the very fabric of my mind, a structure of pure logic and foresight that had been assembling itself in the background ever since I heard Alexei in the garden with Viktor. Walking into the boardroom was like stepping onto a stage. The air shifted. The quiet chatter died instantly. I saw the faces, the loyalists, the neutrals, and Viktor's man, Petrov, sitting with a smug, expectant look that told me he was anticipating a report on my declining health. They saw an old man in an old suit. They were about to learn the price of that assumption. I did not take my old seat at the head of the table. I stood at the front of the room, placing my hands flat on the polished mahogany. "Gentlemen," I began, my voice not the frail tremor they expected, but the calm, resonant tone of a man used to command. "Thank you for gathering on short notice. I understand there have been concerns about leadership, concerns about direction, concerns about the future." I let my gaze sweep the room, lingering for a fraction of a second on Petrov. Let me put those concerns to rest. And for the next 15 minutes, I did not speak. I performed. I outlined a 10-year strategic plan, so aggressive, so meticulously detailed, and so blindingly obvious in its logic that it felt less like a proposal and more like a revelation of the inevitable. I spoke of emerging markets they hadn't yet considered, of technological synergies they were blind to, of dismantling the very legacy assets Alexei and Viktor wanted to sell, and reinvesting the capital into ventures that would define the next 2 decades. I cited specific financial projections, demographic shifts, and geopolitical trends. I did not stumble. I did not pause to remember a name or a figure. The numbers flowed like a river I had charted from its source to its mouth. It was a masterclass. It was the ghost of my former self, not as a memory, but as a living, breathing force. I saw the change in their eyes. The patronizing pity vanished, replaced first by surprise, then by intense concentration, and finally by a dawning respect that bordered on awe. The whispers of senility didn't just evaporate, they were incinerated in the furnace of my intellect. Then I turned to Petrov, which brings me to the proposed merger with Viktor's conglomerate. The room went still. An analysis of their debt structure, which I have here, reveals a catastrophic over-leverage in their core division. Their cash flow is a mirage. To merge with them would be to tie an anchor to our own neck. The board will, of course, vote to terminate all discussions immediately. I didn't ask for a vote. I stated a fact. Petrov opened his mouth to object, but found no support. The other board members were already nodding, their loyalty snapping back into place like a magnet. He was isolated, neutralized, and rendered powerless in a single surgical strike. He had nothing. He was a man who had bet on a dying king, only to find the king was not just alive, but had been secretly building a newer, stronger castle the whole time. When the meeting adjourned, a few of the older members came to shake my hand, their grips firm, their eyes clear. There were no more questions about my health. The architect had returned, and his presence was all the assurance they needed. Driving home, the profound peace returned. It was a cold peace, born not of forgiveness, but of absolute victory. The house was waiting, silent and serene. I walked through the rooms, and for the first time in a long time, they felt truly mine again. The siege was over. The walls stood firm, and inside them, the old lion was not just resting, he was planning his next hunt on a timescale only he could understand. The soil is cool and rich between my fingers, the scent of damp earth and blooming lavender filling the air. It is a sunny afternoon, the kind of perfect golden light that makes every leaf and petal seem to glow from within. I am on my knees in my garden, a place that once was a quiet refuge, a hobby for a retired man. Now it feels more like a throne room. Every weed I pull, every new shoot I nurture is a quiet declaration. I am still here, My new regimen is strict, far beyond the gentle puttering of before. The doctors gave me a roadmap, and I, the architect, have built a fortress upon it. Morning calisthenics. A diet precise enough to be measured in grams and micrograms. Supplements that cost more than most people's monthly rent. My body, this machine I had let grow quiet, now hums with a vitality I haven't felt in 30 years. The biological age of 55 wasn't just a number on a page to be used as a weapon. It became a challenge, a baseline, and I am determined to beat it. Alexei did try to apologize, of course. He came here to this very garden a few weeks after the collapse. He stood where you are imagining him now, his shoulders slumped, his words a carefully rehearsed script of regret and filial duty. He spoke of stress, of Anya's influence, of being blinded by ambition. He said he was my son, that he loved me. But some bridges, once burned, cannot be rebuilt. You cannot unring a bell. You cannot unhear the cold conspiratorial tone in your own son's voice as he plotted with the man who tried to destroy your life's work. You cannot unsee the avarice in his eyes when he thought the final prize was within his grasp. Forgiveness is a luxury, and I have found I am no longer a luxurious man. I am a practical one. Trust, once shattered, becomes a liability. And I have excised all liabilities from my life. So I listened, I nodded, and I sent him away. The silence that followed his departure was not one of sadness, but of profound glacial peace. The siege was truly finally over. He and Anya are living now on his salary, a comfortable one by most standards, but a fraction of what he had expected, what he felt entitled to. They sold their extravagant summer home. Anya's social media, which once chronicled a life of lavish excess, has grown quiet. But that is not his punishment. The financial constraint is an inconvenience. His real punishment, the exquisite, slow-burning torture I designed for him, is the constant gnawing knowledge. The fortune he craves, the empire he wanted to carve up and sell, is locked away in a vault of my own design. It is growing, compounding every single day. It is a shining city on a hill, visible from the modest plain where he now lives, but utterly unreachable for the rest of his productive life. He is Sisyphus, and I have taken away his hill. He must wake up every morning for the next 30 years and go to a job, building a career, knowing that the real prize is frozen in time, just beyond his fingertips, a monument to his own catastrophic miscalculation. That is a life sentence. My own life, however, has been liberated. The quiet, unassuming widower has been retired. The ghost of the architect has been fully resurrected, but tempered now with a wisdom I lacked in my youth. I am no longer the ruthless conqueror. I am the master strategist, the elder statesman. I have found new partners, bright, hungry men and half my age, who do not look at me and see an expiration date. They look at me and see a library of hard-won experience. They value my mind, my foresight, my ability to see the patterns in the chaos. We meet not in stuffy boardrooms, but in spaces filled with light, like the conservatory I had added to the house. We talk of legacy, yes, but of a legacy that is living and breathing, not one being picked over by vultures. The empire is not just preserved, it is growing again. We have acquired 2 promising tech startups and are pioneering a new venture in sustainable infrastructure. It is all on my terms. There is no desperate scramble for quarterly profits to appease shareholders. There is only the long, steady, patient work of building something that will last. The game is the same, but my perspective has shifted from the minute hand to the hour hand. So I sit here in the sun, the taste of green tea on my tongue, the blueprint for our next 10-year plan resting on the table beside me. The garden is thriving. My body is strong. My mind is sharper than it has been in decades. The house is quiet, but it is no longer empty. It is filled with the potent silence of a fortress, that has withstood its greatest assault and emerged not just intact but stronger. The past has been settled. The future is a wide open field, and I have all the time in the world to cultivate it. The sun is warm on my face, the soil rich and dark under my fingernails. Out here, among the roses Irina loved so much, the world feels simple again. But the mind, once awakened, never truly goes back to sleep. The architect is still here, watching, calculating, but he's found a kind of peace. He's earned it. They say a lion does not concern himself with the opinions of sheep. It's a bold statement, one for a younger beast, full of fire and pride. I understand it now, but I see its flaw. A lion must always be aware of the sheep. He must know their numbers, their movements, their simple bleating desires. To ignore them completely is arrogance, and arrogance is a quick path to a lonely death. No, the truth is more nuanced. A wise old lion knows that his greatest strength is not his roar, but his patience. The roar is for show, for territory disputes and mating calls. It spends energy. It reveals your position. But patience is a weapon that sharpens with time. It is the quiet observation from the shade of an acacia tree, the understanding of the migration patterns of the herd, the knowledge of exactly when the young and the weak will stray just a little too far. Patience is the ultimate advantage, because the world, in its frantic rush, has forgotten how to wield it. My son, Alexei, and his partner, Viktor, they were not sheep. They were jackals. Clever, opportunistic, moving in the short grass, always plotting, always scheming for the next easy meal. They think in quarters, in fiscal years, in immediate gains. They see a watering hole and they rush to claim it, snapping at each other along the way. Let them exhaust themselves in that short grass. Their horizon is the next hill, their legacy is the next deal. I operate on the timescale of mountains. Mountains do not rush. They are formed over millennia. They withstand storms, erosion, the slow, grinding passage of ice. They change, yes, but so imperceptibly that to the frantic creatures scurrying at their feet, they appear eternal. That is the perspective I cultivated. That is the perspective that saved me. When you plan not for the next year, but for the next 30, the frantic maneuvers of others become mere background noise. Their clever traps are rendered useless because you are simply not playing on their game board. You are playing on the very landscape itself. This is the lesson I learned in the fire of this betrayal, a lesson more valuable than any single asset in my portfolio. True power isn't in what you own. Possessions are fleeting. They can be stolen, squandered, devalued. A company can be dismantled. A fortune can be lost in a market crash. The names on the deeds and the numbers in the accounts are just symbols. True power is in the time you are given to defend it. Time is the one resource that, when managed correctly, compounds in your favor. It is the field upon which every battle is ultimately fought. My son thought he was fighting me for my money. He was wrong. He was fighting me for my time. He was trying to steal my future, to truncate my influence, to make my remaining years a footnote in his own story. And in doing so, he made his most critical error. He gave me a deadline. He created an urgency. And nothing awakens the architect like a well-defined problem with a ticking clock. But the clock he heard ticking was his own, the impatient ticking of ambition and greed. The clock I heard was the deep geological tick of a lifetime still being lived. So, let this be the final word on the matter. A piece of advice from an old man who has seen empires rise and fall, and families fracture and heal. Never ever underestimate the man who has nothing left to lose but time itself. That man is the most dangerous player at the table. He is not playing for chips. He is playing for the right to keep his seat. He is not motivated by greed, but by principle. He is not afraid of loss, because he has already catalogued every possible loss and found a way to endure it. His wealth is not in his vault, it is in the quiet, unshakable certainty of his tomorrows. He has already outlived his rival's plans, and he is just getting started. He is the mountain, and you are just the weather, and no storm, no matter how violent, lasts forever.